All right, Katie, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Hey, Mitko, thank you so much. I'm doing well. Just living here in Detroit. We've got 65-degree weather, so cannot complain for it being March. But what about you? How are you?
I'm doing great. I am not in 65-degree weather. It's currently 88 degrees here, which is considered cool.
What? Okay, so it gets pretty hot in the area that you're in, yeah?
Yeah, so here in Merida, it's like, it's in like the 90s, and this is their like not hot months. So supposedly
Okay.
May through like August is just hell. So we will not be here during May. So
Yeah, get out while you can.
that's right. That's right. Well, so for everyone listening, just to kind of do a little bit of an intro. So, Katie, you and I have known each other for, I don't know, a few years now. You were really good friends with my wife, Sarah. You guys knew each other from college. Actually, we all went to the same college, but I didn't know you then.
Yeah.
And so we've kind of, been in touch. We're friends. We see each other when we're in Detroit and whatnot. And you recently left your job and you went off on your own. And so we've been kind of in communication since then, just kind of working a little bit together whenever you have questions or whatnot. And so we talked recently and you said that you were going through some kind of struggles or you were kind of having some difficulties. So I thought, great, let's jump on a call. Happy to help. But then I was like, why don't we record this and see if it's just helpful for anyone? So this is almost like kind of like a live coaching call, quote unquote. I don't know. So, but anyways, that's a little bit of a background to everyone listening. Before we jump into anything else, do you want to kind of give people a little bit of a background? I know I kind of went over things very quickly just now, but can you tell people a little bit about what your background is? What did you used to do at your job? And then why did you decide to start something on your own?
Absolutely. So, a little bit about my background. I was a strategic communications degree, and I was always passionate about business and entrepreneurship, but I really focused on that kind of thing during internships, or I found like any possible way to make money on my own when I was both in college, even since like I was younger. Whether it be like I was literally running a laundry business in my college dorm at Miami to be able to like pay for cover for bars. So I was always finding a way to be an entrepreneur, whether it was in college or whether I was younger. So I ended up coming out of college really focusing on digital communications. And I took a job at a large corporation to do a contract with their web designers and helping them create websites in the back end, do a little bit of front end development too. And it was a 10-month contract. So I had about that 10-month buffer period between college and going into the work world to work on this contract and dip my toes into the corporate life and see if I liked it. So I liked it, but I also liked the fact that I was in control because it was under contract. But I was really curious about making more money, and I wanted to see what the corporate life would bring me if I decided to just jump in head first. And I took a job at another major corporation, and I did sales. It was an incredible sales training program, 6 months, very, very vigorous. And I decided to continue on with the sales program and go into a full-time role, and I like hit burnout. So I did sales for a year and a half, and on the side I was always into social media. I was, part of that was just from being in college and learning things in school, but part of it was I like had a blog on my own, and I was super super into social. So I wanted to be able to eventually go off and do that. So in my corporate job for a year and a half, I was working on social accounts on the side, making a little bit of extra cash. And then from there, when COVID hit, and the opportunity presented itself for me to make a lot of money and then step down from my job, I did it. I went for it. I worked really hard and I gave myself a timeline. And then that's something that actually you and I talked about was like that 48-hour time period of sitting down, getting things done, give yourself a limit and go for it. And that's what I did. So now I work strictly for myself, doing social accounts as like a private consultant for a couple different businesses in the Detroit area.
So you mentioned that you did social media before. So what can, obviously I'm a little bit familiar with what you do, but can you give people a little bit of background on like your social media and, you know, what you've been doing for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So the social started when I just created like an Instagram slash blog for myself in college as a senior project. It was like a senior capstone. And I really, really loved it. And I wanted to learn more about social strategy. So I picked up a client actually like partially in college, coming out of college. So upon graduation, I picked up a client just helping them learn like the ins and outs of Instagram and Facebook. So how to even post. Like to me it's second nature, but to other people and to these other companies who their employees are not their first language is not technology. They hired me for consulting, and through word of mouth, I had somebody else come to me and ask for some consulting lessons. And throughout that time, I was like, I could probably manage these people's accounts as well. And I could, potentially throw them a couple graphics here and see if they like them. And if they do, I can get into graphics. I was very interested in seeing what directions this would grow. And I was all about going with the flow for it. So, yeah, I picked up a couple social clients throughout my time in the corporate world. So that way, when I made the jump, I had people on the back end, and then they trusted me to fully run their social media. So I run social media pages, I create them from scratch if you need them, or I just help you sort of reform the ones that you're currently working with and hopefully gain clients through that.
And who are your clients at the moment? Like, do you have a specific niche or industry that you're focusing on?
See, that's something that I would love to talk to you about because I have been following the verticals that have come to me. So right now I work with an architecture firm, an interior design firm, um, another designer as well in that realm. And then I have like a one off automotive client, which is something I enjoy because the client that I did the contract with initially right out of college was an automotive client. So it's something that I'm familiar with and comfortable with. So right now I've got like these two different areas, and my now that I'm able to start growing because I have my feet underneath me and I feel like pretty firm about what it is that I want to do. Is everybody my client, or do I need to be more selective in order to gain more clients and to be able to follow those verticals and be successful and have like a streamlined process rather than grabbing everything that comes to me.
And so you mentioned when you were talking about like what you do with clients, right? You mentioned that you have you create, like you manage their social medias, you create the social media pages. Can you go a little bit more in depth in terms of like what your services are? Like if you had like three main ones, right? What would those be?
Graphics design, social media content creation, and then social media management.
Gotcha. So you're essentially creating the posts for them,
Yeah,
you're publishing them out there, you're scheduling everything, you're putting the plan together, and then you're like managing their entire account. Are you also like communicating with comments and that kind of stuff?
absolutely. So I do engagement, full, like anything that you can imagine that would take for a social account to run successfully, like answering DMs and running ads through Instagram and Facebook, as well as sometimes my clients have me come in with my camera and shoot for them, shoot some of their content within their office. So it's full service. Like I can completely run your Instagram on my own if you give me the trust to do so. Some companies don't have that trust, but some are just like, we don't even want to touch it. Do whatever you need to do.
So you're doing like full stack social media. Like you're creating the content, taking the pictures. Okay. All right. And you're by yourself.
Depending on the client. One of the clients I do that full stack for. Another client that I have has a photographer and a drone videographer that I coordinate with to take the content, and he delivers it to me and I just move forward with it from there based on my strategy.
And at the moment you're just by yourself, right? Like you don't have anyone that does anything.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I'm already feeling that little tick of burnout that I'm catching the feeling of it right now, and I just want to make sure that I get ahead of it.
What do you feel like your clients, so we've talked about what you're producing for them, right? But what do you like, how are you helping them? Like what are they trying to achieve by hiring you?
Most of my clients want visibility. So
They
they
want
have,
to reach more people.
yes, they want visibility, and they have no brand voice on the internet. Some of them just have websites and have no voice.
Are they trying to get visibility for like brand awareness sake, or are they like trying to generate leads?
Both. Depending on the client, I have one client who's looking for more leads, and he's over 60 years old, so he asks me what does everything mean, what does all this stuff do for me, and so he doesn't even know the full extent of what social media can do. So to him, he's just like, if it brings me a client, it brings me a client, great. But if people get my name out there, that's great too. He's kind of accepting to whatever comes his way. And he actually had a phone call come in to his office, and somebody's like, hey, I'm from a different state than what you're headquartered in. But I was wondering if you guys could come out here and do some renderings for us because we want to see if you guys would be a good fit. We saw you on Instagram. And that
Mm,
was when it clicked to him, like the importance of this. So it's a lot of my clients, it's not even just doing the work, it's helping them understand like what the power of social media is for them.
gotcha. And so you mentioned that you're working within a few different verticals at the moment in terms of industries. How have clients come in? How are they finding out about you and how are they like booking you?
Word of mouth.
So
It
like
is
referrals.
100% referrals. That is 100% all my client base. And I had I can give you three examples here real quick. So I've got my aunt, who I made a graphic for her company in college. She ended up she has her own business and ended up working with somebody who doesn't have social media. And she's like, hey, I went to go tag you on social media for one of our projects and you weren't there. If you want a presence on there, I have somebody for you that can create your presence for you, like develop all of your profiles and run them. So that was how I got my first client beyond consulting. And then from there, that person referred me to somebody else and somebody else in their industry. So that's how I ended up traveling through that vertical. Another one is that I was sitting down at a coffee shop, got to know somebody that sits across from me. We do our work the same time every Friday. And we got to talking. He took my name and number down, and he has referred me to 6 different people to help either consult or run their social. So it's strictly been referral. It's been really cool. And finally, just I had somebody pick up my business card from like a cousin, and so it's been luck, but it's also I believe that there's luck by preparing yourself and putting yourself out there. So that's how I've gotten all my clients thus far.
Cool, cool. Okay, so like what is on your mind in a moment? Like what are you kind of like struggling with?
Right now it's scaling. I mean, you heard that I've got 50 different things that I'm trying to do with my business. So, and I think it's because people throw something at me and because I'm new into the industry, they're like, hey, could you do this for me? And, I'm like, yeah, I can. I guess I can. And I'll figure out how to make something work. But I've noticed I've had so many different people asking me for so many different things that I've taken on a lot, and it's going to be hard for me to scale up and to continue on with more clients when I already have such a large scope with the current clients that I have. So, buttoning things up and being able to multiply the accounts that I have rather than just focusing. I mean, I love the clients that I have right now and I'm happy with them. And for a while I was like, this is great. I could stick with these couple of clients I have and I'm good. But to me, I want to progress. I want to reach more people, touch more accounts. So scaling.
And why do you want to scale?
Growing a network, and I'm very interested in other industries. I want to be able to like focus on I don't want to be stuck inside of one vertical. So I have like this fear that if I just stick to one vertical, I'm going to almost like get bored because I want to be able to attract as much information as I can. Like my human design is a projector, so I just like let things come to me. And I think if I stay in one vertical, I will be stuck in that vertical. And I would like to be able to touch all these industries so that way if somebody comes to me, I can be their go-to, or they can say, I know someone that can do that for you because I've touched all of it.
Gotcha. I'm trying to think about it here because so one of the things that happens with like, you're essentially in a service business.
Mhm.
You're running, I'd say, like a solo agency because you're doing a whole bunch of different things, right? Um, and one of the things that you can run into as a problem, and you kind of mentioned that you're afraid to, you know, decide on one industry to focus on because you're afraid that you're going to get bored. However, the other side of that is that if you spread yourself out amongst a whole bunch of different industries, you're never going to really learn the industry well enough
Yeah,
to really solve their problems as best as possible.
for sure. No,
Right? Unless you have like a massive team that you can say, hey, you 10 go figure out this industry, you 10 go figure out this industry.
yeah, it's somebody said this to me a couple days ago. They're like, if everybody's your industry, then nobody's your industry, which is something that I heard in sales a long time ago. Like, if everyone's your client, then no one's your client. So,
Hmm.
yeah, and I think that that's something that if I do that, does that just limit me? Like, does that completely limit me by just selecting one niche and just running with it? Or, I sometimes I feel like I'm just too new to be so choosy into one industry. Like, if somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, can you do this for me?" I'm like, "Oh, sure." Like, I'll stretch out there. I'm like, "Hey, can you do this for me?" Sure, why not? Like, I've just been taking all these opportunities that have come my way, but I think it can get detrimental to my growth because, like you said, I'm spreading myself thin. So do you think that it's more beneficial to be like the expert in one vertical rather than in multiple industries?
I think it depends on what you want. Like, what do you want in terms of like when you think about why you're doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why did you start this company? Why are you taking on these? Like, what do you like? What do you want to do? Right? Like, when you look at yourself, like, I'm not like a big 10-year guy because who the fuck knows what's going to happen in 10 years. But like, when you think, like, I don't know, like in a year or two or three, like, where would you like to be with your business? And where would you personally like to be?
I would love to be just like financially free. I mean, while I love legit living on like I've always strictly budgeted myself, and I would love the opportunity to be in a place financially where like some random trip comes up and I'm invited. I want to be able to go without thinking about it because I want to be comfortably financially independent from any sort of constriction. And I, as far as what I want to do, something about working under contract when I came out of college was that I was on multiple accounts at that time. So half my day was spent working on Coca-Cola, the other half was work on Anheuser-Busch, and then the following day I worked on Chevy.com. So it was like I was jumping to all these different things, and I was the go-to person for those things, which was cool. So I think I really found enjoyment in being able to know and be comfortable in multiple different industries. Like for me personally, now I love the restaurant business. I love it. I would love to be creating content for them, but I also would love to be the person that these architects need their social media up and running, need it revamped. I would love for them to come to me. So I think maybe the best thing for me to do would be picking 2 to 3, because I think that that's what lights my fire, is knowing that I can go back into to different sectors, but just sticking to those 3 then. That seems like something that might make sense for me rather than just being like taking every project that I can get, being a little bit more selective.
So I think like with what you've lined out as like a vision of like what you want your business to do for you, right? As you mentioned, like you wanted to have financial freedom,
Yeah.
like financial stability, and you want to be able to. One of the things that you mentioned, which a lot of people listening to are gonna kind of like react really well to, was like, hey, if there's a trip coming up, I just want to go, right? So that immediately tells us a little bit about how we need to structure the business in order for you to have the ability to just say, I'm gonna fuck off for a month, right? Like that. If you want to have that sort of business, then that's going to inform what we do, right? Because there's a certain amount of autonomy that your business needs to have in order for you to have the ability to do that.
Absolutely, 100%. And like I warn my clients, like, hey, I'm traveling for the next 2 weeks, so if I'm not back to you within my usual 10 hours. I'll make it by 24. Like, because I have just like a policy that I have set for myself. Every email is answered within 24 hours, no matter what. So,
Mhm.
and my clients love it. They love it and they love the transparency and they encourage me to, like, that's awesome. Like, you're going to travel. Great. We'll see you. Because I stop by at my clients at least once a month. So, um, that, yes, I would love to be financially and just location independent as well.
Right.
And that's kind of my goal. So yeah, I think that other people for sure can relate to like their friend calling them and saying like, "Hey, we have this trip planned. You want to come along?" And it's like, as you know, I can do it, but I want to do it comfortably. I want to do it without.
Mhm. So I do think, look, like the fact that you've had experience working on multiple different, working within multiple different industries, and the fact that you've gotten enjoyment out of that is a good thing. So we have a direction with that. However, I am not a fan of like just being open and other people dictating who you work with and what you do for them, right? So we need to make sure that you're still being selective, because if you're not being selective, if your clients are dictating the industry that you're working with it, and then also what you're doing for them, you're never going to be able to create the systems that will allow you to have that autonomy in the business, right? So you need to almost put like, those like little, like, what are they called? Like when you go bowling, those like little gutter rail things that keep the ball in
Yeah,
place.
others. Yep.
So we need to set those up for your business and essentially say, I don't care what's happening on any of the other lanes. This
Yeah.
is my lane, and the ball can move within this lane, but I know this space, right?
Yeah. I love that. I love that visual. Like almost like containers. Like if I were to have two
Hmm.
containers or three containers on my desk, being like, does this fall in this container? Because if not, then like let it pass, let it pass. Like just stick to what you know. Yeah, I really like that.
So what I would say is, I'm curious when you were working on that contract, because that seems to be something that you've brought up multiple times, like that was a really enjoyable experience and something that you're almost trying to get back to in a certain way, right?
Full sense. Yeah, for sure.
So when you were working on all of, you said multiple different industries there, what were you doing for them? Was there a pattern of the work that you were doing for them, or did the work differ?
The work was assigned. So because I was working for an agency at the time when I was on multiple accounts, I was just I it was in the digital communication realm. So it was front end web dev, a little bit of back end, some communication, some training of clients on how to use like their Adobe systems. It was everything came to me, but the one
Mm-hmm.
thing that I loved was like if I was able to go out to a client or a client was able to come to me, I really do love like the in-person um, camaraderie that happens in a meeting when you just are able
Mm-hmm.
to sit down with the client. Now, with that said, that sort of differentiates from the fact of being location independent. Is
Well, and location dependent doesn't, like, location dependent means being where you want to be when you want to be there. So that
right,
doesn't necessarily mean like that when a client is like, hey, I want to meet here. If you want to be there for that meeting, then be there for that meeting, right? It just means like that you're not constantly going to an office that you don't want to go to, right? Like that's what it means to, is like,
yes,
so it's, what's interesting about here is that you had an assigned field of work that you were doing on that contract, right? So even though the industries were different, you still kind of stayed within an area of expertise. And I
yes,
think that that's kind of what you might have to do with your business, is determine your area of expertise and what service you're offering. Because if you're working within multiple different industries and
mhm,
then doing a bunch of different things for all of them, I have an inkling that it's going to be madness, and you're going to have a lot of like, you're going to feel like you're spinning lots of plates and you can't catch them before they break,
right,
right? Because you need to have like some sort of like, hey, this is my fortress and this is where I exist. And within this fortress, you can play and do whatever you want. But if you try to learn all of these different industries and do a whole bunch of different things, so like the services that you offer from industry to industry, I think it's going to be too much,
yeah.
even if you had a team.
Absolutely. And I think you're 100% right. And it's like, I will do like logos, or I will do infographics or pitch decks for people. That is so different than social media. And that's
Mm-hmm.
almost like a different sector of the business. And it's nice because that brings in a lot of money for less time, but I'm also more passionate about the social media side of it, of running people's accounts. So to me, it's been this push and pull of, do I want to just do it all at the same time? Do I need to pick one? What's the smartest move for me right now,
Mm-hmm.
without, to avoid burnout and to still enjoy what I'm doing?
So I before we get into the services and like, because I think the service is going to lead into like what you're saying is that the problem, the big challenge you're trying to solve right now is the scalability, right? I would look at the verticals that you're working with right now. What are the industries that you're working within right now?
Mm-hmm.
And which ones have an overlap?
Okay.
Because what we want to do is, even if it's different industries, we want to be working with the same type of person or the same type of client.
Yeah. Okay.
So which clients, so if we think about like, you have a restaurant that you're working with, you mentioned automotive, like there's like a third one, fourth one. Which ones of those have a client that you're like, oh, I kind of see the pattern here of the, like, which ones overlap, right? So like I could see a restaurant and an architect, both really creative, almost artistic fields, right? So is anything popping up for you when I'm talking about this?
Yeah, I think the clients that I love to work with, without limiting myself, are, I mean, I love restaurant because I'm my background is like food. That's where my blog started, and that's where I like really spiraled into social media, was food. So restaurants, I'm really passionate about that. Architecture is something that's, I was a consultant for an interior designer, which is how I got into the architecture field. And I've loved working with my architecture client. It's a really cool industry, and they've referred me to builders who need accounts. And so that to me is like a really cool industry. So I think those two. Automotive, a lot of the automotive clients that I've come across, it's been a lot harder to work with them because they are so involved in the day-to-day operations of like the technicality and the manufacturing, that like they see social media as like a back burner type deal. They'll pay a lot of money for it, but they don't want to be involved. And what like lights me on fire and I get validation is when a client wants to be like talking about the work, and I don't, I don't just hear from them once a month when they're paying their bills. I would rather have the clients that I'm involved with. So I think
Mm-hmm.
dealing into the ones that I am passionate about would probably be a little bit more helpful for me for a direction standpoint.
Yeah. So one of the things that I like when because I do like coaching with like other people, and it's one of the things that I always try to like emphasize to them is focus on who you serve, not how you serve them. Because when you figure out who it is that you work with, they will almost tell you how you can serve them, right? Like, and the how can change as well. So, I always use this example of there's a woman out there. Her name is Laura Roeder, I believe. I might be messing this up, but I'm like 90% sure it's Laura Roeder. And she had this, she was a social media actually consultant like you. And she worked with a specific type of business, right? She worked with online entrepreneurs. That was her thing. And she did their social media. So at first she started out as a consultant. Then she had an agency that like did a little bit more things. Then she, did courses around that. But then she realized that actually there was a place where she could create a software that answered a lot of their needs. And so she did, and she launched a software that is now multi-million dollar software. So who she served never changed. How she served them did, right? As she learned more about what her clients needed, she adjusted her offering until she was actually able to eventually completely productize it, right? She was able to build a product that served that need. So for me, it's far more important for you to figure out who is really somebody that you enjoy working with, who you are passionate about.
Client.
Repeat that.
Like the perfect avatar client almost for what I'm passionate about.
Yeah, because then when you say like, hey, I work with these people, right? You're going to also get to know their industry. You're going to saturate that industry well enough that referrals are going to become far easier, right?
Mhm.
Because you're building more and more advocates within that industry.
Right.
And not to mention the fact that you know the industry well enough at this point that you can then go like, oh, I know how to deliver for you because I know this industry, I know what works. You kind of like, that's when you start to get a lot of this like, you look at people who are in their like 40s or 50s that have literally been doing the same thing over and over. It almost seems like it's on autopilot. It's because they've just saturated that industry.
Absolutely. Yeah. So definitely. I love that because you're absolutely right. I think by me trying to learn a little bit about each industry, it's going to be really hard for me to be successful to the extent of being like that expert in one person's industry. And because I do work so much through referral, that it might be worth it to me to just pick the industries I know I love and want to work in. So if that be like food and architecture. So if those are the lanes I want to go in, to just travel down them and kind of not look back. I think that that's a lot of like there's like a little bit of fear that goes along with it, is like am I closing myself off to other opportunities? But I think if anything, it's probably going to open up more because people will know exactly what it is that I'm looking for, so they're able to refer me more effectively.
There's a really great quote that I'm probably going to butcher because I'm paraphrasing it here, but essentially the idea is that um, our parents and our grandparents were defined by the things that they said yes to, the opportunities they said yes to. However, what's going to define our success in the current digital world that is so open are the opportunities that we say no to, because we have so many opportunities. There are so many choices. There's so many things that we can do. There's so many people that we want to do with that you're just going to end up spreading yourself too thin, right?
Absolutely.
So I wouldn't be so concerned about like closing yourself off to other opportunities because, and if the fear is coming from like I know one of the things that like other like older business people talk about is like, don't like, you need to diversify into different industries because what happens if one industry collapses, right? But the world is so big that like there's so many options out there that like that doesn't really work anymore. That was true when you were working just in Detroit and you needed to like, hey, there's like 100 of these businesses and that's it, right? Like that was a thing then.
Absolutely. And it's funny you say that that's an older mentality because both of my parents are entrepreneurs. So a lot of the values that they instilled in me are ones that they practiced when they were at my age. So I think it makes sense why I have that fear of like not having like 10 different industries under my belt, so that way I can be that person and be able to form with the changes of the world.
Mhm.
Realistically, we do have so many options today that we can just like take one and run with it.
But and also like, I wouldn't say that you're necessarily like not listening to their advice or to their mentality because I've met your dad. He's a very cool guy, very successful businessman. And in speaking with him, one of the things that he's done is like, I mean, he did the same thing. Like, you need to be at a certain level to work with his company, right? There are certain industries that his company serves. It's not like anybody can walk in there and use his services. So he's created even their business as big as it is. They've created their own little guardrails for their own bowling alley because it's like you need to have this revenue because you have to afford their services. And they work with like, I'd imagine 80% of their business is probably from like 3 or 4 different industries, right?
Right, absolutely. And I mean, they've really put the guardrails up, and it's gotten to the point where like they pretty much serve one industry, maybe two, and that's it. And so that makes a lot of sense though, because I think that, and they've also just like shed some of the services that they've done. So yeah, that
Right.
makes sense. Absolutely.
So, okay. So here's what I would kind of look at, right? I like this idea of, I think, even though you're serving different industries, I would normally say be really specific about who you serve. So I prefer that you're very specific, saying like, the perfect world would be you saying like, I help restaurants do whatever, right? But I think that with some of the industries that you've mentioned, we can get away with highlighting the personality of those industries, right? So like they're kind of creative, they're artistic, they're so I think we can because what I want you to come up with, and I don't know if we've talked about this before, is like I literally want you to come up with this phrase for yourself is like, I help X people achieve Y transformation.
Yes, and I have that on a sticky note. And since the second you said that to me, it is literally, I can see it right now. I have that on a sticky note in the
Okay,
left.
what is it?
It's I well, I have X do Y, and it before
Mhm.
it was I or it is it I help or I have? It's I
I
help, right?
help.
Okay, I help businesses strategize their digital presence through social media management and branding.
Okay, pause.
That's very broad.
Right, businesses. What is that? Who?
So for me now, I suppose if I'm doing it, would it be architects and like service, food service or something like that?
So what I would look for would be like touch the personality of who those people are. And this is not something that I can tell you. This isn't something that anyone can tell you. What I would do is I would literally look at, your architect and your food businesses and just kind of look at what is the personality, right? Like I help creative entrepreneurs
Hmm.
achieve like whatever transformation, right? So I like that sort of thing is, and that's an example, but
Absolutely. I mean, I'd honestly have to think about it because the people in the food industry that I work with, while they are creative, just like an architect is, like and I will tell you because I like to think that I'm very emotionally intelligent. I am like a completely different um, demeanor in one meeting with an architect than I am with, a 30-year-old hospitality group owner that runs a couple restaurants downtown. So,
in what way?
um, one is way more serious. So, like, the architect is like, let's get down to business, and he's 65 and doesn't understand Instagram at all. The other is like, yeah, I just want it to be like what kind of content they want. Like, they want flashy content, they want to mimic the content that you see. And Detroit's definitely on the up and up, but it's not a major city in the way that New York City is. So, I want to, I just want to imitate that. And it's just two very, very different personalities. So it's hard for me to define the personality of one. Or I guess if I do have to find one, I'm really going to have to sit down and think about exploring what commonalities they have between the two industries.
And I'd also look at like it doesn't necessarily need to be everyone in the industry, right? Like I
Right.
mean, who are the ones in that industry that you do enjoy working with, right? Like I'm sure that there is, restaurants who are owned and operated by dicks, and then there's ones that are owned and operated by people who are cool, right? And that are fun to work with.
Right.
So like I would look at like you don't necessarily need to just because they're in that industry doesn't mean that they are your ideal client.
Right. I love working with people that are like I mean, I can just give you like a profile almost, like people that are really passionate about what they do and they've been in the industry for a long time. Like, I love when I work with an expert, somebody that's been doing something for 20 plus years and they have been so focused on their expertise, they haven't scratched the surface with social media. I find that when I like jump in with a newer company, somebody that's like a new owner, and of course that's I almost feel like a hypocrite because I'm new to the business too, but when I work with somebody who really like their job is their life, it's their career, they've been doing this for 30 plus
Mm-hmm.
years, those are the people I love to work with because they're so passionate, and generally they're very open because they're open to my ideas because they've been so focused in their lane they haven't explored social media yet. So I think starting from the ground up with people who and with different businesses who have no presence, that's something I really enjoy, kind of kickstarting it for them. So maybe that's something to consider is somebody who just has no social presence at all, or just revamping for people who have very little presence.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. So everything that you just said, I would find a way to communicate that when you are describing your client, because that right there is like, I mean, you are like, if I were like a newbie who just opened a restaurant and I read that, I'm immediately like, I don't think I am
Right,
Katie's person, and that's okay, right?
right.
So I would look like, personally, I like, my gut is I would want you to select one of those industries,
Uh-huh. Sure.
but I don't think that it's necessary.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
And
I am so new. So it's like I've really, I mean, I'm a year old as far as my business goes. So I think that, I've worked in the nonprofit space with this business. I've worked in food industry, I've worked in automotive industry, I've worked in architecture industry, design industry, fashion industry. So it's like I've touched a lot, and I think it's because I'm still in the beginning stages that I'm like trying to figure out, and I'm in that phase of trying to figure out like what is it that I love? Like what is it that sets me on fire of all the industries that I work with?
mm, yeah, so I would, like I said, I think because there's a good amount of overlap in your industries, that in the verticals that you work with, I think there's a way to work with all of them or most of them. The automotive one, for example, doesn't make sense to me.
Oh yeah.
I like that one. To me, I can, and it's, and everyone's companies, especially in services, like you'll go through growth stages, right? Like in the
Right.
beginning, you're not going to say no because somebody showed up that's saying, hey, take my money. And you're like, okay, right? So that makes sense. But as the company grows, you need to start shedding things that aren't right for you. So I would, this is something that, we're not going to be able to figure out on this call, but I would really think about, is where is there an overlap that can exist for you in terms of the type of client that you serve within those industries. And so like, kind of what I'm imagining is like, you can say, or we, if when you bring somebody on, we help, creative entrepreneurs, as an example,
Mhm.
grow and scale and like, communicate better, or whatever, on social media, right? I'm kind of butchering this, but then underneath it somewhere, you can specify the industries that you work with, right? So you can be like, we work with people in the restaurant business, we work with designers, architects, you can call it out in that way
Right.
to kind of narrow it down.
Yeah, so it's almost like I need to do like a deep dive, like do like a graph almost of what kind of person comes from this industry that I like to work with, what kind of person comes
Mm-hmm.
from this one, and see where the overlap lies. I'm a very
Right.
visual person, so it sounds like a whiteboarding activity to me.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, so that's one thing.
Yeah,
I want to talk a little bit about the services that you're offering, because that's the other place where I'm feeling like there's some issues. Okay.
there's a
So
lot.
do you know, okay, there's two questions here. First one, which ones, if you were to just off the top of your head, obviously to give me the exact correct answer, you're going to need to like look at like financials and stuff like that. But out of all the things that you offer, which ones bring in the most revenue?
The social management, so the entire like month to month, day to day of managing somebody's social accounts. That like I do a subscription service, so I have it set up so that it's like every month they know how much they're paying. They pay me the same amount every month, and that's it. So
And what
that's
do you charge for that service?
depending. So it depends on the client because I have three different types of clients. I have the client who wants like a level one of work, a client who wants a level two of work, and a client who wants a level three of work. So they
Mm-hmm.
scale up by like $800 between each price of package. And I start my package point at 1750.
Okay, so 1715 and 800 up, you have the second tier, and 800 up, you have the third tier.
Yeah.
Is that also the service with the best margins, like the best profitability?
I mean, there's very low overhead because other aside from my time, there's very, very low overhead. So I would say yeah,
Okay. Are you taking home a salary, or are you just pulling out of the business?
pulling out of the
Because
business.
Okay. So this, like the fact that you're saying that you have very low overhead because it's just your time, you need to start looking at that as overhead because it is.
Which is kind of what I mentioned with like the logo and stuff like that. Like the logos were a good pop, didn't take as much time out of my month. And I look at my schedule kind of like on a month to month basis.
Hmm.
Like if I have a project come in where they're asking me to design a logo for them or they want me to do a pitch deck, I can get that out within 2 weeks and make equally like basically the price of an account would make me in a month. So yes, that to me is even less overhead. It's the back and forth that like that kind of that rendering process sort of stresses me out, and so I take that stress, and that to me is a lot of overhead. Whereas
Hmm.
the time that I put into my accounts on a weekly basis for managing them, I mean, it's like between 5 hours and 20 hours. So that's kind of where it's like level one would come in at like they only want me at 5 hours a week, kind of like, and I just talk in hours because I think that that's kind of how I
Yeah.
gauge. But yeah, so it sort of depends on how much time a client needs me.
And for that service, are you, so you said that you're kind of doing everything. So that includes like you're creating the content, you're sharing it on there, you're scheduling it, publishing it, all of that stuff.
Right, correct.
Okay.
That's what
So
takes the most time for sure.
actually, I like the fact that you've already put pricing on there that they know. So that's great because you're already kind of productizing it,
Hmm.
which is what I would actually say is I think you need to go in that direction full steam ahead in terms of productizing your services.
Hmm.
And you're already one step in that direction. What we need to do now, before we jump into that, is this also the, like, would you say that this is the one that gives you the most enjoyment as well?
Yes.
Okay. So how much of your revenue is made up of this service versus the other ones?
Of the social media management.
Like total, if we're looking at your total business revenue,
Yep.
what percentage does that service, whether it's tier one or tier three or tier two, how much of that total does that make up of your revenue?
85%.
Okay. Why don't we cut those 15% off?
Um, I think because I love graphics design and it gives me that sense of excitement when I get to create. Like I love to create. And so that's why I include creating into my branding. But like a lot of the clients that I've worked with in the past and even right now have their own creative team. They just don't have a social team. So most people that take me up on the social packages don't even use the creating portion of it where I'm creating graphics or shooting their content. Most of them have that in house. So by keeping those clients around, I'm still getting referrals from somebody that I did like a pitch deck for to another startup who referred me to a nonprofit. So that travels me into different industries as well. So it might be one of those things where maybe it's worth it for me to just like take away that 15% and keep the creating to like myself and my blog. And I think that if I focused on the creating and that like aspect, that might be something that takes care of like that passion part that really keeps me hanging on to that 15% that's creating from the logos and the graphics and the infographics and pitch decks.
So the 15% that you mentioned, that's like services like you're creating logos, you're making these sort of things, right? And then when you mentioned that your clients aren't even necessarily using the creating part, like does that mean that when you're selling them one of those tiered full social medias, they don't like take, they don't say like, hey, can you create the actual social media post for us? They kind of have their own thing or what?
It depends. Like, I mean, throwing together like a quick graphic for their stories is like nothing for me. But I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
like I will have companies come to me and be like, "Hey, we are brand new and we need a logo." It was like for a couple weeks ago, I had a property management group come to me and say like, "Hey, we are brand new, we need a logo, and we have no idea where to even begin." So I strictly did that for them. Whereas like the companies that I'm working with aren't asking for logos unless they're doing a full rebrand, which like
Right.
helping a couple with, but They already have their in-house personnel to do the rebrand for them. So most people that I work with on that subscription basis don't ask for me to create unless it's like a one-off situation.
Right. So it's interesting that you say this because you're almost, I don't know if you're hearing this, but you're kind of like putting yourself in like where you've been saying that you want to be, right? So you
Yeah.
said earlier on that you want to work with people who are more established businesses, right? But then the newer businesses are asking for the logo work in these things, which are the things that are actually not the biggest part of your revenue.
Right. That's a really good point.
So for me, this almost seems like a no brainer for you to say, listen, I do just this. Like, here are the three tiers,
Mm-hmm.
pick one. Which one works for you, right?
Yeah.
And you can, maybe the lowest one is like, I'm not creating anything on there for, I'm just managing. You have, maybe they have their own like creators on team that can actually like make the posts and like do whatever, and you kind of just manage it, right? And then like maybe the highest tier one is like, hey, I'll make you a post for every single day, I'll actually design it, I'll do all of that stuff, and I'll like,
Lot,
I'll
yeah, do
right.
more intimate
um
content.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is, just because you're not doing something doesn't mean that we can't find a way for it to be profitable for you. So
Right.
what I would find is, if you do have businesses that are coming to you and are saying like, hey, I need a logo, can you
Yes.
help me?
Mm-hmm.
What I want you to figure out is how you can say, I can't. However, I work with a company that I'm very familiar with that I can send you over to, and they do a phenomenal job with that. Because
Okay.
now you're building brand relationships. And
Yeah.
what you can do is you can literally have, logo designers or photographers or videographers for when they need that work that you send
Right.
work to. You collect like a 15% like referral fee.
Mm-hmm.
And also when they have somebody come to them, say like, hey, I need help with social media, they're like, I know Katie, that's who you need, right?
That is so funny you say that because one part that I've left out about this is the fact that I used to do web design too. So think about all the stuff that I have going on. I used to do web design, and the process of it was grueling for me. And I ended up shedding that and starting to refer to somebody else. Granted, I never even considered a referral fee. And that's something that I should probably consider at some point because I have referred like, I don't do video work. So I have one vendor that I refer to all my video work. I should be doing some sort of referral fee for that, considering I've made them thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just, and I would also like go into it like both ways. Like go into them and say, like, hey, if I send anyone your way, well, how about you give me 10% of whatever they spend, and you send me anyone my way, I'll give you 10% of like the first, So that way you guys are literally helping each other out, and you're almost creating like an ecosystem around each other. And this is one of the ways to enable referrals,
Mm-hmm.
right? The first one is just, like we talked about, saturating the industry with your messaging. The more people that you go out to and say, I help creative entrepreneurs, dominate social media
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, the
Yeah.
more that message gets out there, the easier it becomes. By really identifying that who, the easier it becomes to spread your brand to more people. The other thing is, get in touch with all the other businesses that are serving the same industry and enable the referrals, right?
Absolutely. 100%. That's a good point. It's a good idea. That's something that I just haven't, I kind of like slept on in a sense because I do so many referrals because like that's part of my sales nature is if you can't do it, like always have a good referral to be able to connect somebody else to because it just creates, like you said, that ecosystem, that relationship. So I definitely, it should be mutually beneficial because I haven't asked the question of like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to refer this person to you. In the meantime, like, would you be willing to refer other clients to me that you're currently working with or that you come across and need help with social?
Good. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think just, I mean, especially in like I mean, you like, one of the things about you is you have a sales background. So if you remember, like when we first talked, I was like, hell yes, because that's what a lot of people struggle with normally, is the sales. So you coming in with a sales background, I'm pumped, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're always going to be in referrals. I think I mean, not always. You can definitely like invest in other ways of advertising and getting clients, but right now that's going to be your big mode.
Right.
So kind of leaning into it is a good idea.
Awesome.
The other thing I would say to kind of talking about, you've been talking about burnout and that kind of stuff is I think you're starting to likely approach a part where you need to maybe bring some help on.
Yeah. Yep. Yes. And I've talked about that. A, there's parts of that like legally that I would have to work out. B, I'm not making enough right now to even be in that comfortable spot of, like I said, going on a trip at a last minute notice. So to me, it's like, how the hell am I going to be able to bring somebody on and support them as well?
Right. So I think like one of the issues with that is there's a chicken or the egg problem here that
Right.
happens with a lot of business owners, right? So like my dad was a personal trainer, and there's naturally a point where as a personal trainer, you bump into this thing like I only have so many hours in the day that I can work with a client. So
Right.
there's only two ways of making more money, right? One is either you raise your prices or
Yes.
you bring someone else on that that hey, yes, I'm going to be paying them this much, but I'm going to take profit on top of that, right? So whenever you bring someone on, there's going to be a little bit of that. I would say like the easiest way to get past that is to just get a contractor, right? Like you don't need to hire somebody on full time. I would even say don't hire somebody on full time. That's a whole bunch of other tax things and whatever that you need to figure out.
Yeah.
So I would look at things that you don't like doing. So I'm sure that there's something in the process that you're serving that is either not where you're best utilizing your time and your skills and your talent, or
Yeah.
something that you dislike, and
Yeah.
bring someone on to do that.
And that's funny you say that because that was part of the web design was like, do I want to keep that under my realm and have somebody just like have a preferred vendor that I work with that like I send all my website work to, but they still contract through me? Or do I just cut it if I don't like it? So right now, quite frankly, I'm loving everything I do. The only part that I don't like, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, was like the back and forth process of when doing graphics. Like the editing process and to go back and forth about like all the little small minor adjustments after the big product's made. So that's like the one part that I just like don't like, but other than that I really do like everything that I'm doing.
So I I think the actual design is probably going to be where you're going to be spending a majority of your time. It's kind of a time suck. And even if you enjoy it, it's always going to be a time suck.
Right.
So I never tell people to get rid of things that they like. If you enjoy doing something in the business, that's great.
Uh-huh.
But what I will say is this is going to be a clear barrier towards scale, right? Is you can only do graphic design for so many companies. You can only spend so many hours doing that.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that there's a possibility here of hiring on a designer
Mm-hmm.
and you working with that designer to create the strategy and the aesthetic, and then have them create all the minutia in terms of the design, and you just kind of check them off and then say like, hey, this one's great, but how about we adjust it this way? So you still get to flex that muscle, but they're actually doing the manual work. And what I would actually, to keep overhead low, there's some really great services out there right now popping up like Design Pickle, or there's a few other ones like that that are literally you work with an eight. Well, so there's a difference between Fiverr and what I'm talking about, because Fiverr and Upwork are you hiring somebody and you kind of like interviewing them, bringing them on, kind of doing all of that. A service like Design Pickle is actually, there's other competitors as well. They're just the ones that I know the best.
Okay.
You pay them a fixed fee every month and you get unlimited designs from them. So you actually get a designer that comes onto your team, and there's the only person that you communicate with. They
Mhm.
get to understand your aesthetic, but Design Pickle's already done the work of, is this designer good? We're going to take care of all of their things in terms of employment. You just pay them as a software or as like a service, and you work with this designer and they just do this stuff for you.
Okay, and there's no legality between you like claiming that work or anything like that?
I mean,
Okay.
you can write it off the same that you would a software.
Right. That's really interesting. I did not know that that was even like a an option. I didn't know that that was a service. That's a great tool to use because you're right. You are still flexing that muscle of saying like I can help you with this, but you're not necessarily putting the 10 hours it takes to design something. So
Mhm.
that's great.
Because like and the way that like Design Pickle works, for example, as far as I understand, you can do more of this research is you pay a fixed amount and they do like, they don't start the next one until they finish the first one, but it's technically unlimited. If you want to send them 1,000 things, as long as the 1,000 things fit into a month, and that's great, right?
Yeah.
But you can pay more money and get 2 designers or 3 designers that are on call for you.
Yeah.
So you can essentially, and the reason why I'm kind of going into this is we live in a world where I fully believe that you can create a business by just slapping together different services.
Yes. Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. For sure.
So I think I mean, for me, knowing you, I know you're a killer at sales and relationships, and you have a great aesthetic eye, right? So like in terms of branding, in terms of like generating the right emotion, the right design, you're really good at that strategy. You're really good at seeing that. And also you're a killer saleswoman. So I'm almost like, I want you to exist in those 2 spots and then let designers put your vision to work.
Right. I love that. I think you're absolutely right. That's something I've never explored. So, and I think part of it was like I didn't even consider that avenue because it's like this business is my baby. So, you sometimes you have to let go of control in some aspects to be able to gain control in others. So,
Mhm.
I think that that's a really good resource that I will absolutely explore. That definitely makes sense.
And so what ends up happening here, right, is like, let's say you do go down that path. Let's say that you do end up working with a design picker or you hire somebody or whatever, that yes takes away from your take home
Mhm.
pay, but it opens up a whole bunch of time for you to be an absolute saleswoman boss and get new clients.
Yeah, 100%. And that's like at some point, I think that ideally I'd like to have enough clients to where I'm like so overwhelmed with having to manage multiple sources that I can bring someone on and say like, hey, this is your client. Like I'll be like the main point of contact, but this is your back end work.
Right.
Like you're doing the copy, you're doing the scheduling. So that's something to shoot for. That's a goal that I'm working towards. And I think that by narrowing things down and finalizing certain things like that, I help X do Y statement. That'll help me a lot in the long run with being able to get there and get there relatively quickly.
So how do you feel? Like, has this been helpful? Like, has this answered your questions and that kind of stuff?
You're sort of like I've had all these like back burner looming thoughts. Like I have a list that every time I like think about something that I want, I write it down and I revisit it. And I'm like, is this part of my like is this part of the plan? Like is this something that I'm really serious about? And I sort of because like when you're a dreamer, like a lot of entrepreneurs are, it's easy to want 50 things, but only truly what's good for you is like 4 or 5 of them. So
Mm-hmm.
this has helped me kick myself in my ass a little bit to be like, okay, actually, you favor these 2 niches or you favor this industry. Like work with it, go with it, rather than trying to gather so many things and distract yourself from just making the leap further into just finalizing what it is that you actually want as your client. So,
Right.
absolutely, I know I feel like this was a really successful coaching class blessing because it's easier to like think about things and just sit there and be like, oh, like I'll get to that. Like I'll confront that issue later with my business because you're just busy in the day-to-day weeds. But like having somebody who has experience coaching other people on this stuff and having somebody that has been through it himself, it's really helpful to like kind of hear it and be like, okay, you're right. You're like, I do need to figure my shit out.
Nice. Well, I mean, I'm super stoked for you. And I told you that from the very beginning. Like, I know you're gonna be successful. You work hard, you kick ass, you're so good at what you do. Like, I'm just stoked for you.
Yeah, kicked me in the butt and got me to like make the leap. Like, I mean, it took me months. You saw me in that very low valley of when I was in the corporate burnout phase, and you saw like I had my wheels turning, and you were kind of helping me go through making that leap and like being there on the other side. You and Sarah sent me like my first tool that I used today at a coffee shop. She was like, "You guys, you're going to use this stand for your laptop in a lot of coffee shops. Just wait." And I use it. It's in my bag. So I mean, you guys have been so supportive. So thank you so much for just helping me through all of these trials and tribulations of being an entrepreneur.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this and to, letting me record this.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. I'm
but it's a good thing. Like it's people need to realize that it's not just like what you see on TikTok and what you see on Instagram. It's not like you wake up, you change your mind, make the jump, and you're there 6 figures later. Like it's not like that. So it's important, I think, for people to be aware and allow the visibility for other people to see like this is what happens. This is in the weeds, and this is what it's about.
perfect. Well, here's what I think we're going to do, or we might do if you're down for it, is I'd love to revisit this in like 6 months and see what's happened, and I think people are going to be interested to see, and it's going to be good for you because you'll be like, shit, like I need to get on this and tell people what happened.
Right? Yeah, it's accountability for sure. I would absolutely love that, and I promise you, I will be have that XY statement down pat, and everybody's gonna be. I hope everybody's gonna be really happy to hear what's going on in 6 months from now.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And we'll chat in 6 months then.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mitko. Appreciate it. It's always good to see you.